Hey, you guys, welcome back to Not So Trad Wife. Today we have with us Hardy Haberman. We are going to be talking about queer energy in play spaces and how it affects scenes. So, Hardy, if you want to give us like a brief introduction, I'm sure everyone watching knows who you are, but just
Oh,
for the
just
just for us
introduction to
kids.
me. Yeah. My name's Hardy Haberman, obviously. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I've been uh, in the leather subculture scene community, whatever you want to call it, since the mid '70s. And I have a little bit of experience in it. I've written several books on subjects relating to leather and or spirituality in leather, and you name it. And I just am an enthusiast. So
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
always happy to talk to you.
So you said this is kind of a pet topic. Do you want to like scratch the surface or dive deep in?
Yeah, I'll jump
Let's
into it.
I'm really excited about this. By the way, you were like, what about this? And I was like, oh yeah, what about that?
So I consider myself a queer man, okay, or queer, and I used to say I was a gay man. I changed that, and I changed it because I don't think I can fall directly into whatever you want to categorize as gay. I don't really fall into bisexual. Affectionally, I have a partner. He's male. We love each other, and that's where my affections lie. But in the dungeon, I play with anybody. I'm an opportunist, but uh, but I play with anybody, and I like scenes that go against normative arrangements. I so I consider myself queer, and I we back in the '80s we reclaimed the word queer. I'd say we, meaning the LGBTQ rights movement, reclaimed it. Uh, it had been a pejorative term. It was what I got called on the playground when I was a kid, and I said, "Okay, you're going to call me queer? All right, I'm queer." Now let me define it. So I think that's part of what it is. But I there is an energy that happens in let's talk about public play spaces or event play spaces or semi-public, like a dungeon party, something like that. I went into a an event up in Chicago several years ago, and I was invited to speak, and it was a predominantly um, heterosexual event. So if anybody's heterosexual watching, I'm not bashing heterosexuals. I'm just telling you the way it is. Okay. Um, they asked me, would I do a couple of shifts as a dungeon monitor? And I said, sure, because, I wanted to volunteer. And so I got my little vest and I walked in the dungeon. I'm thinking, wow, this is Chicago. This is going to be a hot, crazy, wild dungeon. I walked into the dungeon and lined up in front of me, and I tell this story in one of my workshops, were four spanking benches with four women bent over them, their butts facing me. Not bad. I don't that's good. And four guys that I swear to God they look like Mr. Whipple out of the Don't Squeeze the Charmin ad. And they had canes and they were tapping them on the ass. Tap, 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 tap. And I'm going, okay. And I watched for a while and I'm looking around it. And it's like, and there's nothing going on there. There's no passion, there's no excitement, there's no sex. And I'm getting the feeling I know what's going on in their minds. The guys are going, if I do this long enough, she'll get into subspace and we can go fuck. And they're going, if I let him do this long enough, he'll get into top space and we can go fuck. I mean, they were like a buzzkill. And I wanted to go up to him and said, why don't you guys just go upstairs and go fuck? Because what you're doing is not working for anybody here and you're bringing the whole place down. I didn't do that because I didn't think it was my place to do that. But that's the kind of energy I find in a lot of dungeons. These are dungeons where they're not sex positive, which it doesn't have to be sex positive, but I like sex positive dungeons. And it's a kind of energy that is, look at all that great technique. I like, there's a guy doing Florentine flogging. He's really good at it. But is his partner, are they having any fun? Is there anything going on there other than a demonstration? So that general chill that I find in, technique over passion drives a lot of that. And I find that in pansexual dungeons more than in queer dungeons. And when I say queer dungeons, I mean dungeons where there are more queer people, where it's more queer space. I used to run or help run a dungeon here in Dallas called Inquisition. And we were in business for 4 or 5 years. Uh, we were one of the first full-time dungeons in Texas, and it was a really special place. It was basically about 3 or 4 thousand square feet, a warehouse essentially, and we had a small room for social area. People could get a cookie, talk to each other, have a drink, and then the dungeon was like leather space, and it was sacred space. It was special. So what we did is we had all the equipment in there, and we had lights on just the equipment, nothing else. Good light so you could see what you're doing, which concentrated the action on the play, and it made it someplace special. It was not a place to stand around and watch somebody play. It was a place to go and experience it. So that said, we had some really great parties, and the club itself, it was membership. You had to be a member or a guest. Was pansexual. It was open to anybody. But we would occasionally have what we called in amongst ourselves queer nights. But what we had to change it, we had to structure it so that it didn't sound too exclusionary. So we called them dick parties. If you have a dick, you can come in. It doesn't have to be attached to you. It doesn't have to be part of your body, but you have to have one. And it pretty much that set the bar. And it was like, so we ended up with lesbians and gay men and queer people of various kinds. And those were the hottest parties in the world. They were great because no one was trying to impress anyone. Everyone was just in there to have a good time, to have a hot time, and to play. And you would often find people who you'd never see play together. You'd see lesbians and gay men playing together in the same scene. It's like,
It's
oh
the
my God,
energy.
which to me seemed obvious. Of course, it seems, yeah, why not? But if you did that at a pansexual party, in some cases, people would stare at you like you came from another world, or you would get lots of questions. Isn't he gay? Isn't she a lesbian? What's going on? It breaks their mold. They don't understand it. And I say they, I don't mean that as like, I'm not trying to other anybody. I'm just saying most people would see that and not know what to do. But in a queer party, it's
You're like, hey, that's nasty. That's hot. I
it's
love
nasty.
that.
Yes, exactly. It's hot. I love that. I will tell you a story about National Leather Association years and years ago when they first started doing Living in Leather, which was the first national conference for lesbian and gay men and pansexual, whatever, uh, for kinky people. They did it up in Portland, Oregon, and they got a hotel ballroom where they had the dungeon. And because the organization originally was for lesbians and gay men, they put a piece of that black plastic, visqueen. They separated the dungeon with a big piece of visqueen, and one side was the men's side and one side was the women's side. And after the first night of dungeon at the party, there were so many holes in the plastic from people looking, what's going on? Something's going on that other side. I want to see what's happening over there. That they just pulled the damn thing down and said it's pansexual from now on. And that's really where that word got into common parlance. And the dungeons were hot. And since then, National Leather Association, of course, opened up to everybody. It was no longer just a lesbian gay organization. It was anybody who's interested in leather and who supports their statement of purpose could join. But I think it helped to bring a lot of people into the fold and understand what we did. So when I say queer space, I'm talking about heavily queer space. I'm talking about
Amen.
not just I came out. I learned to play in the bars and in leather bars, and you couldn't necessarily do full on sex in leather bars, well, unless they were closed. But it was men mainly men. There were a few leather dykes that hung around the leather bar that I first went to, but what I saw there was men playing. And when I started going to private parties and to people's houses and playing, it was usually with other men. But I had leather dyke friends who came as well. And in the 80s, I began seeing a better mix of people in the leather bars, uh, and I liked that because when you go to a play party, I'm jumping around here, and if
This
I
is what
sound
we're here
stupid,
for.
it's because I'm old. Okay, so but when you go to a play party, um, I think there's more education going on at that party than there is in any class that I've ever given, because I get to see it. I get to see it where the rubber meets the road. I get to see it live. And a good scene is a good scene. Like, I will say this. I know some heterosexual friends who do DS better than anybody I know. And I watch them do a scene that's very DS oriented, and I'm impressed. And it's hot. And I can't do it. That's not my thing.
Yes.
I'm terrible at it, mainly because I don't mind being dominant, but it's that whole receiving service thing. It's like, I'm from the South. We're supposed to open doors for people and all
Ha,
that.
get off me.
So, but you can also learn. But I've learned a lot by watching women play, uh, watching leather women play. God, some of the hottest scenes I've ever seen. I will. I'm not
Oh.
going to tell you who or where, but it was at a dungeon in Oklahoma, and it was at an event, and there was a women's group that was there, and they were doing an initiation of one of their new members, and their initiation involved having that member strapped over a bench on their back and taking a Hitachi and forcing orgasms one after another after another after another. And I thought it was so damned hot. It's like, now this is the way to play.
This is it, kids.
And of course I'm jealous because the initiate could have orgasm after orgasm after orgasm, but that's the kind of intensity that I don't think you see very often, except in queer spaces. I I first saw fisting in queer space. I never saw fisting anyplace but a queer space. Um, there a famous bar slash sex club in New York City called the I've gone stupid now, down in the meatpacking district, and the mine shaft, and it was pretty much a fisting bar. You went upstairs. If you got in, you couldn't get in if you were anybody, but you had to meet their requirements. And they downstairs was the playroom, and it had a lot of slings, and I remember seeing cans of Crisco on the bar. So
Happy
you kind of know
days.
what's going on. But that was late 80s, early 90s. At that time, when I came into BDSM, fisting was pretty much it. That was what everybody did. Uh, Flogging and the rest of the arts, like really good single tail and all that, were being developed. People were developing it because it took practice, it took years to learn that stuff. Uh, when I first saw a single tail in a club, they had the guy tied to a post, and they wrapped them with the single tail so that the cracker hit the post, so it didn't hit their skin. Thus the name whipping post, and that's the way people use single tails at that time. Now they're artists who can just gently graze your back with the cracker or cut you at their will, and it's fabulous to watch.
Mm.
But it didn't start out that way. But the play that I first saw was in queer space, and it was always hot, and that's because they were there for the same reason I was there. I got into leather not because of the tradition, not because of the honor, not because of the rank. I got into it because there were men, masculine, hyper masculine men, which really turned me on, and rough sex, and that was it. That was the attraction. So I really like that, and I see that more in queer space than I do anyplace else. That's not to say that I haven't been to some parties where there's been some hot scenes going on, and in pansexual space, but in queer space, it's easier for me, you know. And like, okay, I recently, well, at another event here in Texas, um, I found myself, they had dungeons for pansexual, they had a men's dungeon, a women's dungeon, and a
I
queer
think I
dungeon.
was about to tell a story about this very event.
The queer dungeon was the place where the good scenes were happening. You know, that's where it was really fun. Um, you know, I love playing with my queer sisters and brothers. I love playing with people who are transgender, who who are kinky. I have several friends who are trans men, and so I've had some amazing scenes with them. But those scenes are inhibited in spaces that aren't queer space. In queer space, it's, let's go for it. And I think it's because there's the ego is not a big part of it there. We're not as worried about how we look to other people because we're not trying to prove anything. We're just in there to have a good time. We're going to play safe. We're not going to kill anybody, but not unless they no. We're
Both of us are like,
not there to hurt anybody, but it just seems easier for me to play. What do you think? How do you find it?
I absolutely agree. So I was recently at an event in Dallas where they had multiple dungeons, and I remember my tops were like we were looking for a place to play. We went into one dungeon, we were like, we went into another dungeon, and we are like, we went into another dungeon, and I saw you. And I was like, we can play here. This place is safe. But
Yes,
I remember they were sticking needles through my gums, and like I've got blood running down my mouth, like down it, and I look over and I saw what you were doing, and I was like, oh my god, this is so hot. Like, but it was because like when you go into a space and you see that person there, you're like, it's gonna be filthy tonight. Like, get your raincoats on, like it's about to rain. Um, but sometimes you go in and you don't feel safe enough to play. Like I'm like, I don't I don't want to take my clothes off here because someone's gonna call me a woman and it's gonna ruin the whole scene. Like I I too am attracted to hyper masculine men who are usually attracted to men. However, I come in this package.
gotcha.
Um, so you go to a queer space, that's fine. But if I walk into a heterosexual place, they're going to be like, wow, there's two things that can happen. One is, goddess, please let me worship you. And that's not me. This ain't it. Um, and then the other thing is, oh, wow, you're so hot. I want to have sex. And I'm like, okay, well, sex to you and sex to me can mean different things. Cause like we can go over to the bed and have passionate missionary sex. And that might be like the greatest thing for you, which I find a lot in like some of the sex positive communities here, such as like swingers. I find it to be very heteronormative. Whereas if I go to a dungeon, like I can go find somebody who's gonna like put their boot on my throat and piss on me. And like to me, that's what I'm looking for. And I can't find that in spaces geared towards heteronormative vanilla sex.
I hear you exactly, and that's exactly why I like queer space. So I'm going to ask you because I did a lot of what was that? What was I doing? Just give me a general idea.
I don't know if we can say it on YouTube. Um, so electricity was involved um on one's genitals. And keep in mind, like I have needles in my gums. Like I was looking at your scene, but I wasn't fully processing it. But I think you had a cage on the person and you were electrocuting the cage that was on them, I believe, is what it looked like.
That may very well have been. I know that event, and there was a lot that went on that
There
weekend.
was a lot. I did a
There
lot.
was a lot. It's like I, and I will tell you this. I don't want to make this like sound like head bashing, because I know that there are men's dungeons where they absolutely cannot tolerate anything that isn't, you know, like man-to-man sex, which I think is also just as bad as heterosexism. I think it's a mistake.
Not,
Uh,
yeah, not
I
bad, just, but
well,
not what I'm
it's
looking for.
inhibiting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I played at an event, and I had a friend of mine who's a trans man, and he said, "We want to play." I said, "Yeah, you want to play? Sure. Where are we going to play?" I said, "Let's go in the men's dungeon." He said, "Oh, I can't go in the men's dungeon." And I said, "Sure, you can." And we went in the men's dungeon, and we played. And the only comment I got when we came out was, "Who is that hot boy?" And at that time, he had not transitioned. So it was like, that's not a hot boy. And, and that shouldn't be a question. The question is, that was a hot person you were playing with. And they presented themselves as a boy, and that was a hot scene.
There was a local group here that did all men's parties, and several trans men were turned away. They said, "You'll make our guests uncomfortable unless you come back with bottom surgery." So, like, you have to go fly around the world, because at the time there was not a lot of places in the US to have that done.
Right.
There's still not a lot. Like, it's hard. So you
No,
have to go pay thousands of dollars to, and as a trans person, like, I know that not everybody views it this way, but to go mutilate yourself, you are cutting a piece of yourself off. You have
right,
to go through, in, not to mention as trans people, we have multiple, or usually we have a lot of medical trauma from just not being believed by the medical community or trying to be changed by the medical community. So go fly around the world alone and have a piece of you cut off and come back, and then you can come to our parties. Like, it was, and otherwise the only men that you would meet were heterosexual men that are like, "Oh, you have a vagina, hello woman." It
uh-huh.
was stifling, and that's why I, um at the time, I stopped playing with straight people and I stopped playing with gay people. Well, not playing with, but being in relationships with.
Right.
Like, I can have a scene with a straight person, it'll be amazing, but I can't, I you if you view me as a woman, we're never really gonna meet eye to eye. And that's what I love about queer spaces is I can walk in and, like you said, they'll be like, "Wow, that person's hot, that person's leather."
Mhm.
And that's all that you need. It's your green card to kink.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, that that's one thing I like about the kink and leather community, that how it has become, and it's in the process of becoming. I talk about leather, and I think that leather is it's an organic substance that we wear. Of course, I'm not wearing a bit of it because it's 109 degrees outside here, but it's organic, and it grew at one time, and I think the leather community is organic, and we're going to grow and change. Today's leather community is a lot different from when I first came in, and that's good. That's a good thing. Otherwise, it won't stay healthy. I see people dressing. I see straight guys dressing up like Tom of Finland models, and though they do look really hot, and I have no question about that, they get really weirded out when gay men come on to them, and it's like, well, you're gay dressing
Well,
like a
yeah, like, where do you think this came from?
yeah, all right. It's like that. It's the I just got back from Salt Lake City. Are you in Salt Lake or are you in Dallas? Where are you?
I'm in Salt Lake. I
In
split,
Salt Lake.
for those who don't know, I split my time between Salt Lake and Dallas,
Okay.
but we
So I just taught a course up there, a class up there. It was some really cool people. And we did a old guard protocols and why you don't need them. And and the first thing I said, okay, let's see how many of you could get into a leather bar in the 1970s, 1980s. And we used I had the rules from the mine shaft as a start. And the first thing I say, okay, everybody stand up. Do you have a dick? If you don't have a dick, sit down. And then, do you suck dick? If you don't suck dick, sit down. Because it was for gay men, right? And we ended up with like two guys out of everybody there, and that's why that's not really relevant. But that was the old style. The term old guard was originally, I first heard it as a pejorative term. It was like, they're old guard, you know. It was like, on them. We're new guard, or we're avant garde, or we're whatever we want to call ourselves.
Avant-garde. People said that.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. Well, we had spikes on our epaulets, you know. So,
Okay.
but I think that's a I'm glad that has changed. And the idea of queer space is something that's new. I
You
don't
know
think.
what I've noticed is I've noticed so many people recently. I am just gonna say I don't know what time it is, but we're probably winding down on time.
Okay.
Um, but what I've noticed recently is in these spaces, everyone will be like, "Oh, well, I'm kinky, but I'm not leather," and it's like a badge. They're like, "I'm proud to not be leather," and I wonder, is it them holding on to those old guard beliefs that makes them? There it is. 10 minutes. Oh, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
It pulled something up on my screen. Um, but I'm wondering, like, where does that come from? Because to me, like, leather is the queer community that drew me in and gave me a place to be myself. I wonder, what is it that people are straying from?
I think they see the outward signs, and they're looking for rules. I know that, and again, I don't want other people too much here, but as a gay man, as a queer boy, when I was growing up, I knew something was different. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have Will and Grace. I didn't have, Queer as Folk. I didn't have the popular media that showed me what being gay was all about. So I just sort of made it up as I went along. When I got into leather, the leather community made it up as we went along too. I mean, we weren't a community; we were a subculture. I think we became a community. I think AIDS probably brought us together more than anything. Crisis will bring people together. But I think what people see is, if you're heterosexual, you grow up, the rules are laid out for you. Everything you see models a heterosexual relationship, and that is seen as the normative way to do it. So naturally, when you come into a new arena, you go, okay, where are the rules? Because you want to know the rules. Makes sense. And when people say, well, there aren't any, or generally you try to do this, you don't try to hurt each other, and then it gets into this, why aren't there rules? And that's where this well, we want to be like the old guard, okay. Well, but who can tell you about that? Well, there aren't that many of them around anymore. Those were people from World War II in Korea, and they're not around anymore. So you model yourself on this myth that you find in fiction, and you make that into the reality. Um, and you end up becoming like a Civil War recreator, that's the quickest way to kill something. The way to keep it alive is to keep active. And I love these people who call themselves kinksters. In fact, I almost wore my kinkster T-shirt because they have they have this desire to keep changing and to try something new. And that's why I got into this. I wanted to try something new. I still try something new all the time. And that's the glory of leather and kink, is that it's not, like, well, we talk about sex. Sex in leather is not part A into part B. It can be. It can be part A into part B, whatever. But that's not all there is to it. We play with erotic stuff all the time, and it doesn't have to be. You and I could have a scene,
We sure could,
and
Hardy,
I
whenever
suspect
you
we
want.
would both be really turned on, and yet that's about as queer as it gets, and people would probably have trouble understanding it, but I would find it terrific, and I
Oh,
would
yeah.
hope you would find it terrific. So this is called negotiating in public. So
Yes, we're doing. Hit me up whenever you want. I love to get up to all sorts of just mischief.
that's I think where what's happened and where it's going, and just to put a button on it, I don't think I can find the kind of energy any place else but queer space that I really, really love.
Yeah.
And that's why I like events like South Lanes has become a really wonderful queer event, and anybody can go, but it's got queer energy out the
Oh
wazoo.
yeah.
It's
No,
really
just
great.
just so y'all are aware, it's queer.
Yeah. Um, so that's and I'm going to an event next week in Oklahoma City
Oh,
called
okay, okay.
Whitburn. It's
Ooh,
a new event. It's a small event, but it's a queer event specifically, and I am excited about that. I think it's great.
yeah, well, tell me how it is. I'm excited.
I will let you know. It's at the what used to be the Habana. It's now
Okay.
the District Hotel, and they put me in the Tom of Finland room.
I need it. I want that in my life. Have you seen they've got the leather pride flag now with like an outline of one of I want it so
But
bad.
I'm delighted to. I'm so glad to talk to you. You know, we had such a great time talking back in South Plains, and
Yeah.
um, I think people. I suspect people see us sometimes as one dimensional, and that's what I like is the fact that we talked about all kinds of
Yeah.
shit.
Wide variety. We really only started talking this year, but the span of things we've talked about are quite what's the word? Diverse.
Yes, diverse, absolutely,
And I
absolutely.
appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on here in the middle of the day for me. I think that this is absolutely information that people are going to want to hear about, and like when you are looking for like what are the rules, hopefully this is something that people can look at and be like, "Oh, maybe I'll just be myself."
Yeah, yeah. And you don't have to sit around and debate rack versus SSC versus prick versus whatever. Don't be a dick. Don't hurt anybody permanently, and be polite. And that's pretty much it. And you negotiate, let people know where you're coming from, where they're coming from, and the bottom always has the right to say no.
So does
End
the
of
top.
end of rules.
Everybody has the right to say because sometimes they'll be like, "You know what? Nope."
And the top has a right to say no too. I think sometimes people think that we're just, ATM for BDSM. It's like,
They
yeah.
do. They
And
do.
it's like, no, we can say no too. And we can say no in the middle of a scene and just like,
Yep.
this just isn't working for me, and bring the person
Sometimes
down.
things don't work out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's fun when they don't work out. Sometimes it's not. You're allowed to say, I don't want to do this.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes they work out in ways you never expected, and it's really fun.
My God, I had a scene here a couple months ago. Holy shit. It was, yeah, we've got enough time. So I was playing riggers chess with two of my friends. And in between, they're like beating on me. And then at one point, I'm like, I'm hungry. So one of them goes and grits. My husband makes incredible food for these parties, like catering level shit. People talk about the food like more than most stuff. They go get one of these roast beef sandwiches and they're like, "Here you go, pig," and shove it in my face. And I'm like scarfing it down. I'm hungry. It's fucking good. My husband's a good cook. And they're like, give it back. They have me spit it out in their hand. I'm like, are you hungry? And I'm like, yes, let me eat it. They're like, eat it. So I'm like scarfing down the already chewed food. And they're like, spit it up again. It
Oh my
was,
God.
oh my God. And this is all, I'm like tied, swinging. Somebody's punching me. And I'm like, I'm hungry. Just let me eat it. So they finally like feed me the mush. It was, oh,
That is so fucked up, and I love
it was
it.
so good. And that's the kind of energy that I try to cultivate in my dungeon.
Yep, absolutely. I love that, and I think that's why we click when we talk, because I can feel that from you, even when I met you first time back in Salt Lake, at
Yeah.
the Rocky Mountain Rebellion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, this has been fun.
This
We
has
we
been so much fun. I was in kind of a mood today, but this helped.
well, anything I can do to
Of course.
help.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording